So you've watched all of those other videos out there and have now completed your vinyl floor plank project. You've got things looking great. You've got the baseboards in there. Maybe you've even taught some family members how to do some cool stuff. But if you've got stairs, that's where there's a real challenge. Not just the measuring of each one, but specifically that bullnose shape that goes around the stairs. Because that vinyl plank is so thin, as you can see, but we want to get this big, beefy, chunky, cool, thick look where that plank just rolls under there, it's solid, it just works. In this video, I'm going to show you how to router the back portion right there where that bend will happen, heat it up, take that full plank, bend it over nice and consistent around a custom-built wood thing that you can easily build so that it just matches perfectly with each of your steps. I ended up having to make 29 of these for our 3-story townhome. These are some of the good ones, whereas I'll also show you how to make sure that this doesn't happen to you. It's too easy. Suddenly your whole plank is garbage. Also, I'm going to show you how to do 2 really epic transitions. See, at the top of one of our stairs here, the wood comes in that perpendicular 90-degree angle compared to where I want to bend this, yet there is a way to connect this and get it to flow nice and well. Whereas the second transition, this is challenging here because there's no plywood sticking out from that subfloor. So I've got a unique solution here to create some support under the bullnose. You can get this at your local hardware store actually, it's pretty easy. So here we go, title page with, slow-mo. Feeling it. Yes, you can buy these bullnose planks online, but you can't, most likely you can't buy them from the exact same brand. So it's a brand that's made to match the brand of your vinyl plank, which is like, I don't know. But they're like $55+ each for those. So when we have 29 steps, it just adds up to way too much. Whereas each of these planks in the kit, probably $7 or $8 each. You do it yourself, you got this. Yep, and when these are bent and then dry and hardened, these are as solid as they would be if they're just flat. So this side of my little homemade device is basically just a right angle of some cheap wood here. It's basically just a guide wall so that I can create this nice groove behind the plank here so that when I bend it up, this area doesn't buckle as it bends up 180 degrees. This piece is already done, of course, with this router. This bit is just I think it might be called a square shape. It's just making a hole. So it takes 2 different passes to get this width of this rectangular hole. So I put a pen mark here. That's kind of where I just line it up so that I can ride my router along the edge of that guide. Then I move it over a little bit, run it through again, and I get that width. So on the other side here, there's a little extra here. You can ignore some of this wood. There's that main piece right here. That's where everything is built around. I put this fat one in there just because the first one was kind of bent. It was just some scrap wood. I put that there. And then this other piece to the right of it is only there because the long wood screws I used to go through everything poked out the backside. I kind of just want to cover that up so I don't scratch myself. So these 2 on the right are not quite all that necessary. So it's all just wood screwed from the outside here. This is just some of that pre-primed white board. You could use probably anything for this, but I routed the corner on this so that it matches the bullnose shape that's on the existing stair steps in the house. And it really turns out that that exact curve doesn't really matter because when we bend the vinyl plank here, the vinyl plank doesn't make that first 90-degree turn really bold, but it just helps guide the shape. And then in between the 2, on that first board, I just ran the table saw in there. I just flipped this whole thing upside down and then just probably had about a 1/2 inch depth there just to create a groove, and that's where the plank will lay. So I just drop it right in there, give it a good little tap. It's nice and snug the whole way, and I'm ready to heat it up. So, and this is a heat gun, much stronger than a hairdryer, but turn it up to max heat and max fan speed. And then when heating it, go across the whole thing, nice and slow. I'll speed it up here in a second. But you don't want to go back and forth because the back and forth pattern is ultimately probably going to heat up the middle more than the edges, and you want this to bend kind of evenly as you bend it down. Just give it a slow pressure, but eventually it'll just fall by itself. And then when you're heating the back side of it right here, or I guess the top side of it, the place to heat is right after the bend. That's where the new stress point is where it's wanting to bend. Go over about 4 times is kind of what I seem to do before it was lined up. Put a few wood clamps on here, and when you put the wood clamps on there, don't tighten them too much because that little rectangular pad can kind of just make an indent in the vinyl. And while those are drying, I route out the next piece, and by the time I do that and sweep, I'm ready to take all these clamps off. And when you're heating up on that face of the vinyl, if you go a little too slow, you're gonna get some of that open up, just, and you can't reverse on that. So, but you can still use that messed up piece for some of these measurements and playing around with getting the right fit. So for the top of each step, it's gonna take more than just one of the usual width of a large plank over top. You're gonna need a smaller piece also. So I've got them all pre-measured, pre-cut out, and each step often is a little different. Even in our slightly new build here at this house, there's just little inconsistencies for some reason when they put it all in. So it's just wise to measure them all individually. And you've probably seen this with the glue. You just put quite a bit on there with the pattern, and then put a bit of glue inside curve of each kind of candy cane of each plank. Put it on there, kind of rubber mail it gently on there, snug it up, and drop in that little smaller custom piece that you've cut up so that each face is complete. And then after you've completed a whole flight or however much you're trying to work on, it's very helpful to put some weights of some sort. That way when each step is drying, there's not the little squishy spots that can still happen if they dry a little raised from that plywood. Get those things down there as tight as possible. And keep them on there for like 24 hours or so. Make your family walk around it. So in this first stair transition, oddly enough, the subfloor stuck out a little further on one piece than the other. So step one was just sawzalling this thing to make them even. And if your camera happens to fall over, don't let it phase you. Don't let it cut your finger off. Keep it going. We have 2 of these types of transitions, so you might see some different footage from these, but it's the same concept here. But it's where all the running pieces come at the transition perpendicularly compared to the piece that's bullnosed around that first stop. Since the tongue and groove are not made to match up perpendicularly, I had to create another way to just get these to still lay together and be attached well. This idea just came from the fact that I was using the router to make the bullnose and trim away some. So if I just use this to just take away about half of the overall thickness of a floor plank on the slats that have already been installed, and then take it off the opposite half on the slat of the bullnose that's about to be installed, then I could overlay and use a multi-tool here to get the last sections. Lay it, glue it down all together. And even though there's the trick of cutting a really perfectly straight line, I did discover that line doesn't need to be so perfect, because ultimately when you put some wood putty in at the end, it's a great filler and it's so smooth and looks nice compared to having a raised transition piece. Or even the usual top stair transition that is sold is like a squared off transition piece. And so for this other stair transition, it was very unique because there's no overhang at all. It's just a right angle on the top, because what used to be here was tile on the top and it was carpet stairs coming up to that. And I thought about trying to bring some of that wood out, but that worked compared to just picking this up from the local hardware store. It was a metal L and then a metal flat piece. Just created this great support for underneath that bullnose. And it's unique. You start asking around how many people know how to weld, and there's actually quite a few people who have this skill somehow. And fortunately, my son just finished learning welding stuff, and so it was easy to employ him for some of this help. So we got this done in the garage. Pretty inexpensive pieces, actually. And then I had to get some special drill bits to go through that metal into the wood, get some strong screws in there. And you notice I mounted it just a little bit lower than the top of the plywood. And that's because as the bullnose starts to curve down, I needed it to land in that right spot so that it was really solid, so it wasn't pushing the bullnose up. And installing this is even easier than the other transition. You put down all the glue, but I was able to go tongue and groove straight there, parallel to the pieces next to it. And you know, all this stair stuff, it is a lot of work, but if you're doing all of this floor stuff yourself, you might as well take the extra effort. Get it done right. It's gonna look great. If there's anything I missed describing here, shoot me one in the comments. I'm not super good about checking all those comments and maintaining this side of everything, but hopefully I can by the time you got your project going. Good luck.